So I mentioned there's a variety of soils that we have, and over here on the table we have little soil samples from a variety of different eco-roofs that we've been studying. And I think I would just say take a chance to come up and take a peek at these soils because they really range quite a bit. When you pop open those lids and look at them side by side, very few, there's maybe a couple that look very similar, but most of them there's just a whole range of different colors, different textures, different minerals in there. You can see this is, you can see pumice in here, so maybe finer material. Here, maybe a little bit higher organic or fines content in this one. This is what, maybe styrene beads or something, Tom?
Capsulated styrofoam.
Capsulated styrofoam. There is a lightweight material that, you know, will also provide drainage. And then, I'll, hold on a second here. And then this, not to say this is the magic one, but this is the example that we have. This is the O&M building of the slide that Tom showed previously that we didn't irrigate it this summer, and so this is a soil mix. So just, you know, take a peek at it and see if you can see anything that's magical about it or anything. But we were able to have a successful Ecoroof that was non-irrigated throughout this summer and did a good job of surviving. So.
What are its contents? The successful.
Yeah, this is proprietary. You can't open this. It's sealed permanently. It's a time capsule. Yeah, we'll come back and it'll be about half full.
I think we can get the spec for that. It was spec'd 3 years ago, so whatever it was. But one summer doesn't mean that that's the answer, and that it's the soil that made the difference. It is, yeah, curious.
Yeah. So anyway, come up and take a peek of it, smell them, do whatever you need. Check them out. So some of the materials that we have in these soil mixes are pumice, perlite, encapsulated styrene, sand, loamy soil. Sometimes there's expanded clay that they use on the East Coast quite a bit. There's slag material that's sometimes put in. There's what was it? Slate? Is it expanded slate, Tom? That you had?
Expanded clay and slate.
And slate, yeah. So that's where they. Was it shale? Thank you. Yeah, so someone that asked there. So that's where, when we talk about expanded material, they take that, mine that material, put it in a really hot oven at 3,000 degrees, and it puffs up like popcorn, and opens up a lot of pores in that. So it's lightweight. It takes up a lot of space. But then it also will have pores to absorb that water, so they find it pretty successful there. I had one question back here. Yeah.
With the more lightweight materials that are used, how do you kind of defend against wind? If there's wind factors, how is that going to stay put?
Yeah, that's a really good question on scour, is what we call it, maybe from the wind. And that's the kind of thing that if your soil, maybe for instance with the beads or something that's lightweight like those, you might want to put a thin mulch. When I mean mulch, I mean rock mulch maybe on top of that. So river rock or something small that would weigh that soil down and prevent that wind and erosion. Another option is to do, there's a photograph of the Morrison that we had last time that had the jute matting over the top of the soil. That would be another good solution as well. Good one here, yeah.
About the difference in soil between flat roofs and sloped roofs?
No, not specifically here. In the sense of drainage.
Yeah,
and
I would assume that sloped roof you might not want as porous a soil to hold the water since it drains naturally anyway.
Right. And so maybe so, or you might have similar soils, but you might have a different drainage system underneath. So a lot of these soils are still fairly porous, but instead of, we talked about, remember, you might have a flat roof and you may need only a single layer system because you have a fairly porous soil and that water is moving through that soil fairly rapidly and is able to move horizontally. But on a flat roof system or a sloped roof, you might want a thinner profile of that existing soil and maybe a larger drainage layer, be it gravel or mat or something thereof, to promote the movement of that water and reduce that sloughing.
Yeah, would that then would that dry out the soil more? I mean, I assume there's more danger on the slope of the soil drying out and start with the plants.
Because the movement of air?
Because the movement of water, because it's on the slope.
Oh, right. Yeah, and definitely like on the, let's see if I can maybe just go back to it here. And, oh, there we go. How far back was the...
Which one?
I was looking for the, oh, of course it was like the first one. Right here. Sorry, guys. So good example on this roof is that it's sloped, and we don't know, but it definitely will dry out in certain places up above early on. And then as that water moves down, we're seeing a little bit maybe greener towards the edges. And there was a similar a situation at Buckman where we were seeing at the drain, there's a little bit greener material for, just a couple of weeks. So yeah, I think that there's a possibility that soil may dry out faster just because it's sloped and that water is moving faster through that material.
Do you have a drainage mat at Buckman then?
On
the slope? You just talked about a sloped roof. Do you have is there a drainage mat on that one?
On this test roof here?
Yeah.
No.
No drainage. And if you saw the video at the beginning of the session this morning, the Opinella,
right.
That does not have a drainage mat. So the soil is porous enough that it drains on its own. Yeah.
So here's all the answers to everybody's questions about soils. Of course, you can't read it, so we're going to just move on. And anyway, no.
Is this somewhere that we can read it?
Yeah, it's in the plant report. So you can download the plant report. We apologize. It was one of those last-minute things that we knew we needed to get done. And I say we, meaning me, needed to get done, and I didn't, so I apologize. It is somewhat legible via microscope or magnifying glass. So if you have one. Anyway, what this is, yeah, the irony is not lost. Don't worry. What this is providing you, though, we're talking about is that the list on the left here are the Ecoroofs that were studied in the plant report. Then we have the year built in the next column. Then the square footage of the roof, the aspect of that roof, was it south facing, north facing, etc. Then the percent slope of that roof. And then the solar exposure. So even though it might be south facing and a 10% slope, was it shaded? Or did it have a big tree or a parapet or something like that that was shading it? And then we have the growing media. So you can see for some of these, it's not applicable because we don't know specifically what is the percent mixture of that Ecoroof soil. But then for others in here, we have listed the percentages. And I thought on one of these I could actually read it, but I don't think I can.
I have the report here.
If Tom, if you mind just belting off, I'm curious about Hamilton specifically. All these plants.
Oh, it's not too easy to read in here either. But one thing about the soil that is not an answer you're going to get from today or from this report is it doesn't tell you which soil works the best for which plants. It just tells you what the soil is associated with the project. So we have not made a determination as to which one we would recommend or not or that kind of thing. We're saying these appear to all work. Right. So there isn't one silver bullet. It's actually maybe there are 6 silver bullets, or maybe there's 10, or maybe the exact mixture doesn't matter that much.
And also, are there mixtures? We talked about the multiple benefits that we're looking at for soils. So are there mixtures that are better for stormwater retention? Are there mixtures that are better for biodiversity? Are there mixtures that are better for specific plant material that's out there that you would want to grow on the Ecoroof? So we can. Do we want to print this out? Do we think it? So we could print this out during lunch. Would that help for everybody? And then we can hand it out. That'll be the take home for you. Okay, we'll do that.
The whole report?
No, just this slide big. So we can read it. Okay. Yeah.
So last week you were talking about the weight requirement for the Ecoroof on the building, and so how does that affect these various soil mixes? Something with more organic matter that holds more water is going to be heavier than a styrofoam encapsulated.
That's exactly right. So what we've seen, and I'll just move on because we'll print that one out and we can talk about it after lunch. But this is the progression that we've seen that I think addresses your question, is why there's various reasons as to why we're moving since 1997, I guess a one-third soil mix. To 2006, we're looking at kind of that 70% high mineral content, 20% compost, and then, for example, 10% recycled paper fiber for a little bit of that water absorption. So what we're seeing is that movement towards lighter soils because of that higher mineral content, better draining soils, and then I'd say soils that also meet, that early slides that Tom was showing about that sedum hanging onto the cliff. Really we're moving more towards what I would say is more typical of a growing environment for a sedum, rather than kind of this one-third mix that is just something that we've made up for our garden variety. So we're getting lighter soil mixes, better drainage, and that's coupled with some water absorptive capacity. So up on the top here is just this is when I was mixing my soils for my roof. I did a fairly technical 80%, 20% by volume system where I just had 5-gallon buckets and I measured how many cubic feet were in a 5-gallon bucket. And I think I had five 5-gallon buckets and then 1 cubic foot of compost is what I used. And then just used the tarp to mix it up, and that was my kind of lightweight soil mixture. So I don't know what the actual gradation that would be by weight is typically how a lot of these percentages are broken down. But that's just an example of just another mix. Yeah.
Regarding the cost per cubic feet of the soil mix, 97, that ratio compared to the 2006 ratio, does it mean that with more mineral it's going to be more expensive? And the maintenance of that, does the mineral deplete after a while, and do you need to replenish that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as for the cost between those two, I don't know. It's tough to say because the materials that I purchased were just on my own, and it was pretty cheap. I think it was $40 a cubic yard or something like that for the pumice. And so, but when you're getting into there's 3 companies now that provide soil mixtures in Portland, and they're Ecoroof specific mixtures. And those are they're blends, and therefore you're going to pay for those mixtures because they've been tested or they've been thought out and those kinds of things. So I think there's as for cost, it's hard to say because it's all over the board for Ecoroof specific soils. Because if you maybe mix your own, it might be cheaper, but maybe not as well. Anyway, does that help?
I think also there's so much to learn. For instance, what I put on my garage, Ecoroof, in 1996, and we don't have it here, but maybe we should, is it was actually just the soil from my backyard. So it's a sandy loam, and I just mixed a little bit of compost in it, and I just used a very thin layer because of the weight, because it is much heavier than the thicker stuff. So that's been up there since 96, and everything grows, and so it's like there's just a lot of questions and a lot of questions without answers yet.
And yours is in the chart that we're going to print out, and it was 80% sandy loam, 20% compost. And was that pretty cheap when you purchased it?
No, it was pretty expensive. My wife, no, yeah, right out of the backyard. So.
Right.
So for small projects, you're not going to do that on a building downtown, and that's in lots of other structures where we really need to have those companies that have soils to provide.
Yeah, question.
Compost is a huge category. Do you have any things you don't want to see or do want to see for compost?
Good.
I mean, if you go to buy compost, you can get large chunks, you can get what it's made from. I mean,
right. No, as for now, no, we aren't specifying soil mixtures here, and so as for the testing, we don't know exactly what that compost entails. And so, is it? Yes, you mean like steer manure versus mulch, wood mulch, hemlock, or something like that versus. Right, there is a range of stuff, and no.
Compost pile, I have a lot of nice, fine.
And how much is that per cubic foot?
Yes, I think the main thing you want to do with compost is make sure that it's fully mature compost, so that, because if it's not, it's going to continue to decompose and you'll lose volume. So if you're kind of counting on a certain volume, and it's not mature, then it'll keep breaking down and you'll get some further shrinkage.
Well, that's a really good point. Is the shrinkage issue where we're getting in these higher compost soils that you could see either some of that blowing off, the fines blowing off over time, or that compost breaking down. And so what this higher mineral content does is it provides that aggregate structure that will not break down over time, and it'll stay 4 inches or 3.5 inches or whatever you've put in there and maintain that thickness over time.
Another thing with compost is if you get one that's not fully cooked, so to speak, or it's still cooking, you could potentially kill plants if you plant in it when it's still a little bit raw.
Got a question here?
Yeah. Curious about the recycled paper fiber, if that was something that was purchased or made at home.
No, that's just something. The one on the right is not my mix. It was just a mix that we had. I don't know if that was.
There's one of the companies
yeah.
in the region has numerous mixes that they have, and they use this paper fiber. They call it digested fiber and stuff like that. So there are just a lot of. I shouldn't say a lot of ingredients, but there are ingredients that various companies are looking at and using that that we just don't have a lot of information about that.
Yeah.
As far as the soil mixes for these buildings to get the $5 per square foot, is there any are there going to have to be specific soils that we use up on the roofs to meet these criteria as far as when you go through one of these companies who provides a satisfactory soil percentage of everything as far as for the grants, things like that? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
No, yeah. No, we don't have a spec that you have to meet for the Ecoroof soil mixture for this grant program. What we say is that it's going to be a lightweight growing media.
We do ask you in the application, it'll say what soil you're going to use, but it's not for the criteria of judging the value of the project at this time.
Yep.
You got to take into consideration that when you're doing an Ecoroof, a yard of soil at 4 inches deep only goes 80 square feet. So typically you're buying a unit or 2 units or 3 units of soil, and you're just not going to mix it out of your backyard compost. You're buying it from a local supplier, and they're delivering it typically in totes that you lift with a crane or by bucket or something. And so you're buying a blended mix which is specifically designed for Ecoroofs.
And it's, and I'd say, yeah, that's true on larger scale projects. But on this one, for instance, my shed, I did 1.5 yards of soil, and I was able to mix it with I acknowledge the help of my 3-year-old daughter, who was mostly in it rather than actually helping me. But and I did that in I mixed it and was able to put it on my roof in a 3-hour period using 5-gallon buckets. So 60 buckets, 1.5 yards of that. And so I just kind of measured the time and thought, well, for my roof, it might be 4 times more and could possibly be something I could do over a weekend or get a help of some friends. So I think The bigger scale stuff, I definitely agree that you're going to get stuff delivered in bags or what, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I think there's definitely potential there for some custom mixes for smaller scale projects. Okay, I'll take one more question and then I'll move on.
So often we sacrifice the health and welfare of another watershed to save our own. So has anybody looked at recycled or salvaged materials for soil?
Tom, do you want to talk about the study?
You were here last week, right?
I was.
So I didn't cover that last week?
No.
Okay. I'm going to test you. Now, what I mentioned last week, I thought, was that there have been studies going on in other watersheds, actually, especially in Illinois, the state of Illinois, and they have looked at various recycled materials that they tested, and then they tested the runoff from the roofs that use these different materials, and they found that they had concentrations of different constituents or pollutants that were high enough that they felt this is a problem. And so the caution is, be careful what you put in the mix. So for instance, on the Hamilton building, we've had copper coming off of the west side at a concentration that is not desirable as it relates to what the in-stream water quality standards are for copper. So it's such an early stage. We want to keep an eye on that kind of thing. We want to caution people about using recycled materials. If you just kind of start asking the question, what is it? Where did it come from? Is it a byproduct of what, or whatever? And just this, even this digested fiber, well, it's a byproduct of recycling paper. Right. So is there anything in that stuff that might be associated with the inks or other things? So it's like, not to say that you ask these questions and you don't use any of this stuff and you just use real dirt right out of the ground, but to ask that question and then especially to ask, since we're on soil, to our knowledge, there are 3 soil providers. So ask those soil providers, what's in this stuff? Have you checked? And do you know where's it coming from? Have you asked these questions, which I think are great questions to ask, so that we get it in their area, just like the nursery industry looking at what's in their potted plants, so that you don't have to deal with the unknowns of that. And of course, we're in such a new phase of this industry that just having those questions come up and bringing them up, I think a lot of the industry will be responsible and say, okay, yeah, I didn't think of that, and I guess I'll check into it and try and find out, things like that. Yeah.
And I think another question that has come up that I've seen a recent study on was just asking about the embodied energy of these lightweight mixtures that we're getting, or these lightweight minerals, so one of them being perlite or expanded clay or expanded shale. And because pumice, being a product that is mined, such as such as clay and those types of things, but there's a second step in many of those other ones where they will mine it, then take it to a place and put it through a heating process that expands it. So there's a lot of energy going into creating this lightweight product. And is there some considerations about maybe using something that doesn't require this extra energy in order to create it and make it into a lightweight product, and just using something, pumice is one, and other lightweight materials that just exist naturally, even though they might be a little bit heavier. So one more thing I wanted to point out on soils before we move on, and we can definitely take questions about this at the very end, but I just wanted to point out some interesting things on this is the FLL guidelines. I think we talked about this last time, where this is kind of German standard for green roofs. I think there are many companies that are looking at creating soils that may meet these, and then also may expand on them in either one way or another, being more towards a mineral content or a little bit more towards the organics or fines content. But just pointing out that the for single and multiple course construction being our extensive type materials, that they're showing fines for clay and silt being at 7 to 15% by mass or by weight. So that's getting pretty low. 7% even that's pretty low, and then also for the organic content, I just want to point out at extensive greening sites, it's looking at from a range of maybe 6 to 8%. as low as 4% on some of these for specific type soils. So that just gives you a range of what's out there. Exactly. Yeah, and that was 2006, and I think that the industry is getting a hold of these and starting to understand. And what we want to know really is not that this is the Bible and we're going to go with this. It's this may be another alternative, and can we learn from this and move our soils and our gradations one way or another to facilitate stormwater management, biodiversity, plant survivability in our specific climate, which is a little bit different. And so it'll be interesting to hear how tests go. David, at the end of the day, we have to talk to people about materials and relative costs without doing a sales pitch. Okay, we want some information on that? Great. Okay, thank you. So the last piece I wanted to point out was just quickly soil installation methods. So you have this great soil mixture that you've spent hours worrying about and fretting and asking great questions, and now how in the world are you going to get it up there? Well, one way, of course, is just manually. So wheelbarrows for more movement of that soil, maybe from the front of your house to the back of your house or vice versa. 5-gallon buckets work great with a rope. You can set up kind of a pulley system sometimes, or just have a whole bunch of friends and a ladder. And then we put in, of course, shovel. Tom he'll demonstrate his shovel technique of throwing that stuff up there. Highly scientific, very ergonomically correct shoveling technique. And so other things, you can imagine, handfuls of throwing it, whatever it might be. And then crane is definitely a way where you have maybe a taller building in an urban site. There's not so much of a parking lot or anything to be able to use, that you're going to bring that flatbed truck in with bags of soil on it, and you're going to have a crane there because maybe you've already done your re-roofing and the roofing crane is still there. And that's what you see in the photo, is a bag being hauled up, and then there's you can just open it on the bottom and that soil will fall out. Maybe use wheelbarrows then to run that across the rest of your roof. Another way to do it is conveyor belts. So there's trucks that you may have seen blowing bark or soil in your neighborhood, and it has a fairly long conveyor belt at the back of it, and it will actually shoot soil quite a distance. And I think on the project that we witnessed it on was, 30 feet tall maybe? The Cathedral Place?
Oh, about 25, yeah.
25 feet tall, so they're able to get to maybe a 25-foot tall building, back that truck up and launch it in there, and then use wheelbarrows and whatnot to carry it around. So that's kind of a nice one-stop, and that's where maybe you might have a parking lot immediately adjacent to the building to facilitate that truck backing in and being able to shoot the soil up. And then lastly, a newer technology that is used in Europe quite a bit, but we're getting a few of those trucks around, is a blower truck that will actually blow this soil up multiple stories in a 8-inch or 10-inch diameter tube, and then they can actually stand out there and put this soil exactly where you want it as you walk around the rooftop. I guess those trucks, what we're trying to promote, of course, is the expansion of the green roof industry. And these trucks are very expensive, so what we're hoping is to get this green roof industry going where it would make sense for a soil provider to purchase one of these and have it in continuous use as all of you are putting soil on your rooftops. So any questions on that at all? Fairly straightforward? Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
This is Portland building. This is this building, and the streets were closed for the weekend, 2 days. They got the soil up. And then one aspect of this building is the penthouse, which is another 20 feet above, and so they actually had a conveyor belt type, conveyor ladder type thing that they attached from this 15th floor roof up to that roof, and so then they put it on that in buckets, and then it dumped, and then they continue to do it.
So that was one they set up on the roof. They hauled it up with a crane
on the roof. Yeah, so they had to bring it up.
Yeah. So maybe something that's used typically in the roofing industry was maybe
the roofing industry and new construction. A lot of things.
Right. For that.
On this one, the contractor didn't. They had a lift on the side of the building to For instance, the roofing contractor lifted a lot of the materials up to the roof by attaching a sort of elevator type lift on the outside of the building. And then that lift was too small though, so it couldn't bring the soil up, because when you buy the soil, if you buy it in large bags, the company gives you a better price. If you have to have it bagged, which some of the companies don't bag it into smaller bags, then you have to figure out a way to do that yourself. So in this case, they had to have it in smaller bags to get it up that conveyor or that elevator type structure, and it was more expensive than renting a crane and then hauling it up when they got it at the bulk rate from the soil provider. So there are lots of questions to ask as you're doing a project in the sequencing and making sure, try not to forget something like, oh, how are we going to get the soil up there?
Right.
Or will it fit on our structure?
Yeah.
I guess the other concern would be if you're using a crane with a large container of soil on it, is the load of that material as it's being placed on the roof itself.
Right, and that's where you can see well, maybe you can't see, there's maybe a little army of wheelbarrows right here. Yeah. So as you open that up, it'll either pile up right there, you can put wheelbarrows underneath it and just run them out as a soil. But that's a really good point. Yeah, you don't want to get it blown or conveyed or something and just say, yeah, put it right there, and you've got, this mountain of soil, and you're wondering why your building's starting to sag. Yeah, yeah, tipping backwards. So good point. Okay, so we're going to roll through. Looks like we have about 40 minutes left before lunch, and so we're just going to roll through irrigation, hopefully fairly quickly.